Welcome to DLA Dialogues, Factory to Foxhole, the podcast where we dive into the heart of DLA's mission and mindset. I'm your host, Jake Boyer. Today we're digging into one of the most critical issues our nation faces, securing and reclaiming critical and strategic materials. Joining me is Nancy Albertson, physical scientist in DLA Strategic Materials, and virtually we have Don Helle, R&D Program Manager at DLA Disposition Services. Could you each tell our viewers a little bit about your roles at DLA and what you do day to day?
First of all, Jake, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to share about DLA's strategic materials. As you said, I'm a physical scientist. I'm a chemist. And I think there's three areas where I do the most work every day. And one is assist in our material acquisition. And then another major part of what I do day to day is materials testing, analysis, and verification that the materials that we're buying and spending a lot of money on actually meet the specifications that we've set forth in the acquisition requirements. And then the third big part of my job is the Germanium recycling program. We call it the GURP. I know it sounds a little bit like indigestion, but it's not. Very important program where we're recovering germanium, definitely a strategic material, and from military end-of-use components, end-of-life components.
All right, Don, over to you.
Well, as the R&D program manager, we kind of have two primary focuses. One is warehouse modernization. We've got the bumper phrase of mitigating the dull, dirty, and dangerous. So we look at robotics. We look at digital twins and things we can do to put our people in critical thinking positions and not necessarily dependent upon the strength of their backs. Then the second part is this circular economy, evaluating our scrapyard, and what we receive is, we call it EOU inventory, excess, obsolete, and unserviceable. So we look at our property that comes in. If it's excess, we try to do the reutilization. But if it ends up in our scrapyard, we're looking at the raw materials in the scrapyard, which the end items are made from, and seeing what in there could be reclaimed and what elements in there are from the periodic table or are strategic, critical, or rare. Strategic materials, critical materials, or rare earth elements. And we're doing the evaluation across the spectrum to look to see what the demands are, what OIB needs, the organic industrial base, or the DIB, the defense industrial base, and of course, Nancy and the strategic materials.
Nancy, let's start at the foundation. What exactly are critical and strategic materials, and what are the challenges associated with them?
So critical materials it's a pretty large set of materials. These are defined by a material that's essential to our national economy in the U.S., obviously, and our national security. These are materials where there is a risk of supply chain disruption, but there really isn't a dire risk right now. And these are materials also where research and development shows some promise that we may be able to substitute at least part of the material supply with a different technology. And then there's strategic materials. They're a subset of critical materials. Strategic materials are essential to our national defense. Without these materials, our weapon systems will not work, and that's makes it very much a strategic material. These are also materials where the supply chain is on the verge of being disrupted or it's currently disrupted. So these are very important materials. Great examples of such materials are antimony, germanium, tantalum. There is quite a long list, unfortunately, of these materials, but that's just a few examples. At Strategic Materials, we're always focused on the future warfighter, DLA's warfighter always. Well, we're focused a lot on the future warfighter. In the event of a national defense emergency, we have to think, what does that warfighter need when we need to release this material? What are they going to need right away to know that they can use it as quickly as they can in the event of that emergency?
Don, over to you. Why has this mission, protecting and securing critical materials, become an increasing area of focus for DLA in recent years?
In 2022, we started to identify, we being the Department of Defense, risk with suppliers for semiconductors. And we were evolving into the EV, the electric vehicle batteries. And for us, disposition services, we receive excess, obsolete, and unserviceable. So we're trying to always lean forward to anticipate what types of property are coming into us. And as we were getting into the anticipation of receiving EVs, electric vehicles, of course, there was always the risk of the thermal runaways with the lithium batteries. So as we were trying to learn more about that commodity, and positioning ourselves for the risk and what we can do in the future, DLA set up a battery council, and I happen to be one of the members in that battery council. Again, leaning in this on the disposal side, and we learned from the Department of Energy that the mining element, that there's 33 countries in Africa, and China has exclusive mining rights in 31 of the 33. So then you quickly realize your vulnerability to an adversarial supply source. And then that was kind of the first, major red flag. And then you ask the obvious question, well, what else do we depend on? Not just lithium or cadmium or, the EV battery spectrum, but where else do we have a vulnerability? So as we were looking at the totality of that, you start looking at your weapon system with a periodic table lens, and it's a different dynamic. We've I've been at this for almost 40 years in my federal service, and we've never looked at our weapon systems to see what periodic table element they contained. So again, a bit of that paradigm shift. So when you get into that and you start, informing or becoming, educated on the different topics and your vulnerabilities, you look at submarines and howitzers and just across the entire spectrum and how many or how much periodic table elements are used. And then you look at your supply sources. It's, adversarial supply sources, they could turn off the spigot and you receive no more germanium or no more anything. And then you realize that those assets aren't onshore and they're not readily available in the United States. So we started to really get serious on, okay, what do we have? We recognize the fact that the end items we receive have those raw materials in them. And then what can we do to start the reclamation or the reconstitution of that? And that's been the journey so far.
Nancy, Don talked a little bit about this, but from your perspective, why is reclaiming these materials so essential in today's environment? With contested logistics, what's changed globally that makes this such an urgent issue?
Well, I hit the second part of the question first. What's changed globally is we have some nations out there who have control of a large chunk of the worldwide market. And for various reasons, they've chosen over the years, especially recently, to cut us off, pretty much the rest of the world from this supply. Well, that puts us in a difficult situation because not only do we not have the materials here, we also don't have, even if we were able to get some of the raw materials that leads to that critical material, we don't have the manufacturing infrastructure to refine it and improve it and get it into a form that at least can be a feedstock for actual manufacture of some of the components in our weapons platforms. So that's what's changed recently, specifically, especially with germanium in 23. China cut off the U.S., the Netherlands, and Japan for retaliation for chip policy. But then a year later, they cut off everybody. So for materials, that could happen to any material.
Nancy, could you walk us through germanium as an example? Why is it so important for the DOW, and what's the current situation regarding its supply?
It's important because of the current situation. We actually started at Strategic Materials. We actually started stockpiling germanium back in the 80s, believe it or not. But it was in 2014 when we started to look at the possibility of recycling. And the reason this has been such a focus for so many years is because China, through their predatory mercantilism, their practices in that area, they've gotten such a huge control over the worldwide market. And so we started looking at this in 2014. It wasn't until late 2021 when we got the contract in place. And in early 22, we started producing. And the pretty cool thing about this is that we can mitigate 10% of the United States need for germanium, and that's just from recovery of the scrap that the military, the germanium-containing scrap that the military generates whenever they need to refurbish an item or it's an end of life or it's broken or whatever. And we can use that. The other cool thing about this is with the data we have about germanium that's been bought by DoD and their prime contractors in infrared optics and other applications like solar wafers for space powering, is with those records, we've realized that DoD and disposition services, we can self-sustain with this recycling program. And if we can, on our end, we're so thrilled to partnership with disposition services on this because they are basically our mine for the materials. The program is so dependent on the feedstock, and they are the mine. They are the military mine for our material needs for germanium. So this is important, and we've had some growing pains in getting past that. I think there's a lot more work to do, but this is really a great potential for germanium, and never needing to worry about predatory mercantilism again. And it's a great example of what can be done. Germanium is quite a cool element. It is, whenever it's in its crystalline form or even its polycrystalline form, it's transparent to the infrared spectrum of the light spectrum. So imagine, well, here's a great example, an everyday example. Whenever you're watching one of those cop shows or live PD or whatever, sometimes you'll see pictures from the helicopter that they show on screen. And you get to see those images. It's nighttime. And you get to see that pretty clearly. You're likely looking through a germanium lens because it allows those thermal light waves to pass through. It's transparent to that. And same thing for hot things. And so there's that. That's why it's so important. Can you imagine not having the ability to see at night if you're in the military? That would be difficult at best.
With that, Don, can you describe what the actual process of reclamation looks like for materials like germanium? What kinds of steps are involved from identification to reuse?
Oh, this is a great collaboration between Nancy and myself. So originally, Nancy had provided some training on germanium to a DevCom group. And in there, she had what she called the money list of NSNs, which contained germanium, positive. And we put out a flag in our WMS warehouse management system and our inventory that whenever something comes in for our receivers it sets up a flag and it says, set the item aside. And then I call Nancy and say, hey, we've got some stuff that needs to be looked at. And then they have a team which they go around with an XRF gun, an X-ray fluorescent gun, to scan the items which we suspect to contain germanium, and then they actually confirm it, and it contains germanium, and then they coordinate the recovery and the shipping to go to their contractor, the JERP contractor. And so again, this is a great collaboration because I do the front half and identifying things which possibly contain germanium or that are on her list, and then I notify her team. They come in and they scan, confirm, and then it really goes off to her side, and I'll let her speak to her contractors and how that works on her end.
Could I add to that? Because Don brings up a lot of good points in there, but additionally, before we started this partnership, some of that scrap would actually go out for sale. And 99% of the time, if not 100% of the time, that scrap's on a barge across the Pacific to China. Our main adversary, let's face facts, when it comes to germanium. And with this program, this material never leaves DoD custody. It is government-furnished material to our contractor, and it's a service contract, so we get the material back in a form that is so usable in both solar panel wafers and in the infrared optics. So this way, we're attacking this problem of a critical source or a critical supply chain from two fronts. One, we're mitigating it, and the other is we're not helping our adversaries, which is key. We cannot. I think we have to pay attention to the leakage of these valuable assets that Disposition Services has in-house.
The way she describes it, Don, it almost makes it sound like an extra level of demilitarization for the stuff you all bring in.
100%. And to me, I always joke amongst my peers that there's no greater form of demilitarization than something being a powder or an ingot. We want to make sure something is demilitarized, but if you can make that item into a brick, it's done, and it's done well. And then it can actually be reused in a future application. So you think of, you mentioned that, the germanium and the heat signatures. Think of all the drones and the night vision goggles and all the applications, not just today, but that owning the night capability gets more profound every year as that technology continues to grow. And it will only grow and expand if we have the raw material. So Disposition Services is committed to being tenacious on identifying anything that has a thermal signature capability, and then having strategic materials or having the XRF guns to scan to confirm the presence of the germanium, and then keeping that alloy or that precious commodity onshore and within the Department of Defense, because then again we can be self-sustaining.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation with both of you, but as viewers know, before I wrap up, we've got the lightning round. Got a handful of questions I want to ask you. We'll do it Nancy first, Don second, as I ask the questions. So first off, what you been reading lately?
Well, typically I read fiction. I love fiction because my whole day, my professional life is filled with nonfiction. And I love political thrillers and legal thrillers, crime thrillers. But oddly enough, I recently read, a friend of mine in Michigan suggested a book to me a few years ago by Thomas Sowell. And I read it, and it was great. I love the way he wrote because he, in my opinion, he thinks like a chemist. Very analytical. So I was more curious about what's his background. So I picked a book by him from 1987 called A Personal Odyssey, where I got to have a little insight into how he came about, how he was brought up, and what his life was like. And I just finished it this last weekend. It was really good. But I'm going back to fiction.
All right, Don, what are you reading lately?
You're not going to like this, but it's Freedom's Forge, about the World War II and how the again, this is kind of what we're doing right now today, the bumpers to bullets kind of mindset, that perseverance, and how the commercial industry, they could be making refrigerators, but they knew how to make stuff, and then they would be making aircraft parts. And it's the military civilian industry partnership. So Freedom's Forge, what a great book.
To our viewers who are keeping track, that is the second recommendation for Freedom's Forge. So I can tell you at least I'll be reading Freedom's Forge sometime in the near future. So now to my next question. I'm kind of a nerd. So what's your superpower, Nancy?
I have X-ray vision. No, I'm kidding. I think my superpower is my curiosity and my thirst for knowledge. I really, whenever I come across an area where I just don't know enough about it, well, at least in the sciences, when it comes to finance, forget about it. Just not going to happen. So at least when it comes to science, I dive into it and I try and learn as much as I can from the sources of knowledge, other experts, publications in scientific journals. And I do think sometimes it's tiring because I go very deep into it. But I do think that is a good thing to do.
All right, Don, what's your superpower?
I would say mine is I'm also a very inquisitive learner. I'm an innovator. I love trying to peel things apart. And I think my last thing would be a perseverance. My last name is Helle, German heritage, and I am as stubborn as they come. So once I get onto something, I like to say there's nobody. You want me as your ally because I am perseverance. I am stubborn, and I combined with an innovative thought and tenacity. That's my superpower.
And finally, every superhero also has their kryptonite. What's yours, Nancy?
I would say it's OCD, which kind of is a double-edged sword. It kind of leads me to that what I like is the curiosity and then the diving in for the knowledge. But I think it also has a bad side to it because I'll dive so deep in that I have gone so far past the point of knowledge that I need to make a rational decision, and I am lost in the weeds. So I'd say getting into the weeds personally is problematic. It's also kind of fun because in my personal life, I have dived into pottery, hobby pottery, and Vespa scooters, and I'm just obsessed with them.
All right, Don, what's your kryptonite?
Kryptonite. I think anything that's lethargic. I burn hot. I've been gifted a few Energizer Bunny tokens or dolls throughout my career. I burn hot. I like to get things done and get things done quickly. So anything that's policy, anything that's lethargic just irritates me to my core because I want to move quickly. I want to get things done, and I hate. We'll come back around to it. Not good.
Well, Nancy and Don, thank you so much for this conversation today. I think it's been very illuminating for a lot of our viewers. And also thank you for your dedication to focusing on these issues. I think they're some of the most important issues of our time. For DLA Dialogues, this is Jake Boyer. Until next time, remember that learning is a superpower. Use it wisely.